Much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Center for Air Power Studies, especially Jasjeet Singh sir and Shalini ma'am. I wouldn't be here without the support of my department, so I would also like to thank Dr. Arvind Kumar for the guidance that they've provided for the paper. In the current international security environment, with Pakistan emerging not only as a hub of terrorism, but the fact that they possess a nuclear weapon raises serious issues about its security. In the words of Bruce Riddle, Pakistan has more terrorists per square mile than any place else on earth, and it has a nuclear weapons program that is growing faster than any place else on earth. In the words of Graham T. Allison, when you map weapons of mass destruction and terrorism, all roads intersect in Pakistan. And in a report of the State Department, they called Pakistan is an epicenter of terrorism. These quotes highlight the perception the international community has about Pakistan. But before I go into the security issues, I'd like to talk about the evolution, very briefly, about the evolution of Pakistan's nuclear program and its current capabilities, the objectives of Pakistan's nuclear weapons, Pakistan's nuclear doctrine and strategy, the threats to the safety and security of nuclear weapons, and the challenges before Pakistan in addressing the safety and security issues. Evolution of Pakistan's nuclear program. International politics has always revolved around the concept of balance of power. And according to this concept, when a weaker state is threatened by a stronger one, there are two ways in which it would react. One, it would try to externally balance itself by getting into alliances with a greater power. Or two, it would try to internally balance itself. In the contemporary global environment, the most important or the most powerful tool a weaker state could have to internally balance itself is the nuclear weapon. So in the early 60s, in Pakistan, there were debates about India's capability. There was a group of people, academicians and intellectuals, who believed that India had the ability to build the bomb. One of them was the president of Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, Sarwar Hasan, who wrote in 1960 that he believed that India was developing atomic bombs. But there was a whole group of other people who believed that India did not have the resources, the technical know-how, or the skilled manpower to develop the weapon. But in 1964, after China's nuclear test, when Homi Bhabha's famous statement that India could produce a nuclear bomb in 18 months was said, as you can imagine, this caused an uproar within the Pakistani establishment. In 1965, India acquires the first plutonium reactor, and the same year, Pakistan was defeated in war. So the fear of India's conventional superiority not only started to emerge, but it was proved in this war. Yet again, it was proved in the 71 war, and this drove the point home. So in 1972, as a direct result of this, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto convened a senior meeting in Multan with the nation's top scientists, where they were asked if they could build the atomic bomb. And in 1974, Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission set up a body to build the nuclear device. It was called the WAR Group, and it was codenamed Research. It is clear, therefore, that even before India conducted its first nuclear test in Pokhran, Pakistan had kick-started its program to build nuclear weapons. The ruling elite of Pakistan was convinced that this was the only way that they could match India's conventional superiority. After India's peaceful nuclear explosion, there was tremendous pressure on Bhutto to develop a weapon and finally match India's capability. Following this, he took up the leadership of the nuclear program, made it more secret, and abolished the inter-ministerial committee in charge of nuclear issues. Pakistan aspired to set out in the same direction as India and extract waste materials from the Carnap nuclear reactor and reprocess the waste into bomb-grade plutonium after purchasing the reprocessing plant from France. This, however, did not work out due to US intervention. Although the Franco-Pakistani agreement was in compliance with international safeguards, US opposed it on the grounds that Pakistan could redirect the plant to attain nuclear weapons capability. They put incredible pressure on both Islamabad and Paris to reverse the deal until finally France withdrew in 1979. As a result of this, the nuclear weapons program seemed to be stalled for a while. This is when Pakistan decided to employ the highly enriched uranium method under the guidance of Dr. A.Q. Khan. By 1977, the leadership in Pakistan was taken over by General Zia-ul-Haq through a military coup. He was persistent with the nuclear program and wanted Pakistan to acquire the nuclear capability during his tenure. Changes in the geopolitics of the region during this period worked as a catalyst in aiding General Zia attain his objectives. In 1979, as the Soviet forces invaded Afghanistan, Pakistan became a very important state for the US. The Cold War rivalry between the two superpowers elevated Pakistan to a position of power, and it was evident when Islamabad rejected an aid of $400 million offered by President Carter, with General Zia referring to it as peanuts. This was followed by Reagan administration providing $3.2 billion in assistance in 81 and a 6-year aid package of $4.2 billion in 87. In addition to this, the war also helped Pakistan bypass parts of non-proliferation legislations. Although there are no confirmed reports, it is also widely believed that during the Afghan war, narcotics trade flourished and the income from it, which amounted to billions of dollars, was used to fund the nuclear program. Although China and Pakistan began diplomatic relations in the 50s, nuclear cooperation between the two countries started in the 70s. Statements from Zulfikar Ali Bhutto reveal that nuclear cooperation between the two countries formally began in 76. In 82, China provided Pakistan weapons-grade uranium for 2 atomic bombs. The Chinese also transferred tritium gas, which is used in the manufacture of hydrogen bombs. It also supplied heavy water to the Karnak reactor. It is also believed that China provided Pakistan with test facilities in Loknoor in 89. And there are reports that claim that Pakistani scientists were present in Loknoor during the Chinese tests. Chinese also helped Pakistan build the Chashma power plant in addition to the Kahuta research laboratory. By 1976, 5 Arab countries and Iran had provided financial assistance worth $1,000 million to Pakistan. Between 73 and 77, Muslim countries in West Asia provided loans and grants worth $1,000 million, thereby becoming Pakistan's highest donors. During 73 and 74, Bhutto also held discussions with Libya's Colonel Gaddafi, who provided assistance to the program. In return, Pakistan shared nuclear data and expertise with Iran, Libya, and Iraq. President Zia-ul-Haq in a speech in 78 outlined that, and I quote, China, India, the USSR, and Israel in the Middle East possess the atomic arm. No Muslim country today has any. If Pakistan had such a weapon, it would reinforce the power of the Muslim world. And therefore, he created the idea of the Islamic bomb and received continuous support from the West Asian nations. And in 20th May 98, Pakistan conducted 6 nuclear tests. The current status of the program. Pakistan has continued to expand its nuclear weapons program, both in terms of delivery vehicles, more effective warheads, and expanding from highly enriched uranium-based devices to plutonium-based ones. In 98, Pakistan had commissioned its first plutonium production reactor at Kushuk. In 2006, several analysts opined that a second plutonium reactor was being produced, and a third one in 2009. In 2008, the International Panel on Fissile Materials, IPFM, estimated that Pakistan had perhaps 65 to 80 weapons and may be increasing its stock by an equivalent of about 6 weapons worth per year. An assessment in 2009 by the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Federation of American Scientists estimated that Pakistan may possess fissile material sufficient for 80 to 130 warheads, although the actual number was deemed to be less than 100. The objectives of Pakistan's nuclear weapon. To balance the power asymmetry with India. As you know, compared to Pakistan, India has several advantages in terms of conventional military capability, inherently strong political structure, and even geographical advantages. Pakistan has been acutely aware of this fact and views their nuclear weapon as a power equalizer. To deter a conventional attack and offset India's conventional superiority, it also sees the nuclear weapon as a weapon of prestige. After the defeat of 1971, Pakistan had to redeem its lost pride. In addition to this, it also gives them a certain amount of diplomatic leverage and that lets them be more assertive. This was evident recently during Islamabad's war of words with the US, when the Chief of Army Staff Kayani asserted that Pakistan was not like Iran or Afghanistan. It was a nuclear weapon state, and the US had to think 10 times before launching a unilateral attack on Pakistan. There is no doubt that Pakistan could not afford to be this assertive, devoid of a nuclear weapon. It also gives Pakistan the power to negotiate with India from a perceived position of strength, to attain strategic parity, and the reliance on nuclear weapons in Pakistan's overall strategic calculus in the region, and it also has linkages with its domestic politics and environment. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine and strategy. Pakistan, unlike India, does not have a written doctrine. Various statements by its leaders need to be analyzed to piece together a doctrine. Perhaps the most important component of the doctrine and strategy is that it's entirely India-centric. The rationale for acquiring nuclear weapons in the first place was because of a perceived Indian threat. This complete lack of trust and immense doubt over India's intentions began with the events that led to the partition in 1947. The Pakistani ruling elites remained convinced, or rather legitimized their existence by reiterating the view that India not only opposed the formation of Pakistan, but to this day is looking to integrate Pakistan with the Indian Union. A common definition of the term minimum deterrence, because the next policy is minimum nuclear deterrence, is an attempt to prevent enemy attack through reliance on a small nuclear retaliatory force capable of destroying a limited number of key targets. The amount required for minimum deterrence is, however, not a constant number. It is dynamic in nature, which means that it's subject to change. There are several factors that could influence this number. 1. The number of nuclear weapons estimated with the adversary, manner of their deployment, survivability of the force, and force configuration of the adversary. For nuclear deterrence to work, there are several factors. The requirements of Pakistan's nuclear deterrence are a nuclear force that is not too small, that is capable of quick assembly, diversifies weapon designs, and also credible delivery systems. Pakistan also has a policy of first use. This is basically to make up for the power asymmetry with India, coupled with the fact that they have a serious lack of strategic depth. In the closest to an official statement on this issue is a statement of the Director General of Pakistan Strategic Plans Division, General Khalid Kidwai, during an interview with 2 Italian scholars. In this interview, not only did he famously say that Pakistan's nuclear weapon was aimed solely at India, but he went on to explain that Pakistan's nuclear threshold was premised of 4 benchmarks. 1. If India attacks and occupies a large part of Kashmir. 2. If India manages to destroy a large part of Kashmir's land or air forces. 3. India economically strangulates Pakistan. And 4. India causes any political destabilization or internal unrest through submersive measures. The strategy of Pakistan also includes carrying out low-intensity conflicts across the LOC under the nuclear umbrella. The command and control structure. A country's command and control structure depends on its threat perceptions, its geostrategic compulsions, and its national security strategies. In 1998, General Jahangir Karamat appointed Major General Khalid Kidwai to administer the Evaluation and Research Cell to provide recommendations for a nuclear and command and control system. The formation of the National Command Authority, which consists of military and civilian leaders, was a result of this. In 1999, General Musharraf suggested combining the Combat Development Directorate, the Operations and Plans Directorate, and the Command and Control and Intelligence Directorate to form a new body called the Strategic Plans Division. Later, in the next year, the National Command Authority came into being. Although a security and screening process existed earlier for individuals employed in these strategic organizations, it has now been made very comprehensive with the introduction of the Personal Reliability Program, where all individuals who have access to critical knowledge or work in sensitive areas of the complex is required to undergo a rigorous security process. Since 1998, the SPD has also been responsible for conducting external audits on all nuclear facilities.